Hello and welcome to another episode of Foundation with Steve Teed. I am your host and servant, Steve Teed, always asking you that important question. What do you build your life on? What is it that you use to determine right and wrong? What is it that gives you those answers in life? Because if you're on the wrong foundation, which many people are nowadays, they're not on a solid foundation, they're left just wondering what is going on. They're left perplexed. They're left anxious. They're left depressed. Yes, that all gets connected together. So on this show, I hope to help you just to establish a firm foundation. And obviously, I teach that the firm foundation that never changes is that of Jesus Christ. All right, let me cut back the music, and I'll tell you where we're gonna go today on today's episode. All right, so if you've been with me and you're one of the ones that follows regularly, you may have noticed that I've become a little more sporadic in episodes coming out once every 2 weeks. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is if you're a visual person here, you probably notice my background's a little different. The reason being is because I've been having some technical difficulties with my other system. And it's the one that I normally use. And that's normally at my office. And so I changed to go to my other system, which is at my house. And so what you're seeing behind me is actually my house. And what you see directly behind me there is nothing more than our food schedule for the week. And you can actually see what we kind of eat in a week if you want to. Really fascinated by that just because of the special requirements of the children and things like that. We have very specific menus. That answers one question. The other reason why it's become a little more sporadic is I am actually coming to the end here of Season 2, 26 episodes. That's a good length of a season. I usually take a couple of months off. That gives me a chance to refresh and that kind of thing. As the kids finish off school and that kind of thing, I spend a little more time with them, just because that's important as well. So there probably won't be too many more episodes here in Season 2, and then we'll come back probably in the fall for Season 3. But let me tell you where we're going to go on today's episode. Today's episode has a title, and I can tell you that right up at the front. Normally what happens is I usually try to develop the episode, and sometimes I come up with the title really early based on the context of the episodes. Other times, I don't know where the episode is going. I just have a bunch of stories that I want to talk about, and therefore I come up with the title later, and it's a surprise to me, usually at the end, as it would be to anybody who sees the title. But this one, we do have a title. This title of this episode is called Ideologies and Syncretism. And you go, what on earth is syncretism? We're going to unpack that in the second half. But I'm going to tell you, it does have a lot to do with ideologies. And it really does. We're living today in a clash of ideologies. That's really what you're seeing. Every time you look around, there's ideologies that are being battled. This is why news articles are being at. Even when I was looking at a little bit earlier, not what I'm going to cover. But again, it was just them arguing and complaining about certain places passing either anti-transgender laws or anti-abortion laws. Really what you got to understand is that this is really about ideologies. When it comes to the abortion law, in abortion and things like that, the ideology is, whether you like it or not, if the child is in the womb and the mother doesn't want it, then the child isn't really a person. That's an ideology. And then in that ideology, they try to determine what exactly is life. In the transgender ideology, it's really all about what really construes a man and a woman, what really is masculine and femininity, and what really is. And what you're running into is clash of ideologies. That's not the only one. All of these ideologies can ultimately be summed up under one that has gained traction for quite a bit, and that is cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism. You go, okay, what on earth is cultural Marxism? That's where you've heard about the woke agenda. And then they try to redefine woke, and I've defined it a couple of times on earlier episodes on the actual definition of woke. That's a good working definition. But it really is in cultural Marxism is a little different than the original Marxism. Obviously, the original Marxism was an economic ideology where it was all about economic classes and class frictions and things like that with the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, that kind of thing, fighting back and forth. So it's all about clashes and an oppressor and the oppressed. So although original Marxism was all about economic, cultural Marxism is all about our culture. This is what you're seeing happening, and this is where the battle is. you've got multiple cultures. So, and it comes out in what you call critical theory. It's our modern term for it. They don't want to call it cultural Marxism because Marxism itself has negative connotations, so they just rename it as cultural theory. Critical theory, sorry. And what they do with that is there's a variety of them. You're probably familiar with critical race theory, and you're seeing the clash of that happening, and you're seeing backlash, and you're seeing things like that. You see one that recently, I think it's Netflix, that put out like an Egyptian show, and they have Cleopatra as being black. And even Egypt itself has put out a formal statement complaining about this. But why did they put it? Because it has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But that's really critical race theory. That's what it is. That's an example of critical race theory, and they're fighting back against it. Now, Netflix isn't the first to do that. I'm going to tell you this. They're not the first to do that. I remember watching a show with my wife. She used to watch all the time called Different World. And in that, they play high school students, I think, for the first bit, or college students, one of the two. I didn't watch too much of it. I didn't really enjoy the show. My wife did. But then I remember specifically, because it caught my attention, where even in that show, they were advocating that Cleopatra was black, when odds are she's not. But you're seeing this in other ways. The Little Mermaid, you had it in there. Pinocchio, making the Blue Fairy a black woman, and you're seeing that continuously. And that's critical race theory. But we also have critical gender theory, which is what you're seeing with the transgender movement. That's really what it is. And now you've got, in the one that's most prominent is the LGBTQ group. I guess what you'd call it is the critical sexuality theory. They don't really have a term for it, but it's probably as good enough. And the reason that to understand all this is because it's all about oppressors and oppressed. It's got nothing to do with anything else. And I'm going to prove that to you right now. How many, ask this little question here, how many of us can define all the words of the titles, the acronym LGBTQ? You probably can. Lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer, or questioning, depending which one it is. But the actual acronym is far longer. The actual acronym that's in there is actually more of a long LGBT2QQIAAP. Now, can you name all of that? And why do I bring this up? Because this shows you where the actual problem is. That it's not just about a sexual identity. It's actually about bringing down what they classify as the oppressive class. So let me just go through some of these. Okay, L. We're probably from that. Lesbian. Woman who's attracted to another woman. Gay. A man who's attracted to another man. Often called homosexual. B. The LGB. Bisexual. Person attracted to both male and female. The T. Transgender. A person whose gender identity is different from the sex that the doctor put down on their birth certificate. I'm using formal definitions here. 2. If you're not familiar with the 2, that means two-spirited. Why? Because you've got to be respectful of one of the other oppressed classes, in this case, and that would be the indigenous people. So they don't have transgender. They've got two-spirited, which is exactly identical to transgenderism. That's why you don't always see it. Q for queer. So I don't even really know what that is, but it's in here, so I'll use the formal definition here. It says originally used as a hate term. Some people want to reclaim the word, while others find it offensive. It can be a political statement suggesting that someone does not want to identify with binaries. So in other words, it doesn't even have any meaning. Queer just meant odd. That's what it usually meant. Q, questioning. A person who's still exploring their sexuality or gender identity. I, intersex. A person whose body is not definitively male or female. A, allies. Allies. It's really what the first A stands for. In that, in the LGBTQ2QQIAAP, the first one is allies. Then the second A is asexual. P is pansexual. This is, why do I bring that up? Think about this. It's an acronym now that is designed to do one thing, and that is to exclude. That's all it is. Although it talks about the fact that the term LGBTQ, and it even says this in this one website that I'm looking at. This is BBC News that I took all this from, just so you know. LGBT plus, it says, is an inclusive way to represent. Inclusive. Actually, what it is, it's become so inclusive that it's actually exclusive. That the only group that is not included in this inclusivity are those who are straight and believe that homosexuality is wrong. That's what it is. And we need to understand that. Because that it's not about inclusivity. It's a culture clash. And they're saying, if you're not going to be part of our group, we're going to exclude you, and we're going to shame you, and we're going to tear you down. And this is an ideology. This is what it is. And that's going to bring me right into the original first story that I want to talk about today. And it's the LGBTQ ideology. And I'm going to show you what it talks about. So for that, I got to pull up my music here. That's my show. I can do that. All right. The first story here. Parents upset over teacher's strict warning for rejecting LGBT ideology. The parents are upset over a teacher's strict warning for LGBT ideology. Now, I'm going to give you a warning here because this is actually out of Britain. You go, okay, why is that out of Britain? We're in North America. Why Britain? Because all the first world countries that are classified as first world countries, we're all dealing with the same thing. Our cultures may look a little bit different, and it does. In various places. It looks very different. But at the same time, the ideologies that are developing behind the scenes and coming to the forefront are very much the same, including the rise of the LGBTQ 2+ ideology. And it's being pushed. Now, let's unpack this story a little bit. It says, concerned parents have lodged a formal complaint against Stationers Crown Woods Academy in South London after a recording was released on social media of a teacher telling students that they would be dealt with severely if they dared to reject LGBT teaching. Now, that is there. This, you can understand, this is in all our schools. I'd like to say that it's not. And I think a lot of times you can believe that it's not. And what I mean by that is one of the problems is now there's not much homework being sent home. And with that, and because of that, you're not actually seeing what's being taught. And even when homework is sent home, one of my kids gets homework every once in a while, and we get a sheet of what to help them with. It's always like, oh, teach them these sight words. Here, help them out with this basic math. And so you get this idea that, oh, so they're actually teaching what they're supposed to be, reading, writing, and arithmetic. But one of the things that my wife and I have done is we've actually developed a relationship because of the nature of our children with the resource teacher at the school. And we were blessed because she was also, at the time when our son was going through, was his grade 2 teacher. And then she turned around and she ended up being also the grade 2 teacher of my nephew. And so we developed a good relationship. And we talked a lot back and forth, emailed, that kind of thing. And even now when we were talking about it, my wife sent her a message saying it was good not to see it. And she said, oh, no, it's all there. It's all there. It's just they're not putting it so you can see at home. But it is still there in the classroom. It's there in the teaching. It is there constantly. But here you just got an example of a teacher that said, hey, anybody who dares question this as a student will be dealt with severely. But let's continue. It says, according to the Christian Legal Center supporting the parents, the incident occurred after a 14-year-old Muslim boy reportedly objected to viewing a video that affirmed children coming out as gay, lesbian, or bisexual because of his religious beliefs. Now, that's a fascinating thing, too. Most times when you look at the culture of North America, the ideological war is being fought between Bible-believing Christians and the culture, the LGBTQ. That's really what it is. But here you see, and it's true, that even in Islam, homosexuality is wrong. This is where Christianity and Islam actually have some coincided morals for the most part. That we were created as male and female, and designed, and the plan was for a male to be with a female. Anything else is a perversion of that. And so you get a 14-year-old boy who stands up and says, I don't want to watch this. I reject watching this. And you see that it's the Christian Legal Council who's supporting it. So it says, in a statement shared with the Christian Post, the group alleges that the teacher launched into a tirade equating resistance to learning about LGBT issues with racism. Now, here's where you're also seeing an issue. This is one of the things about critical theory, is that certain critical theories have to yield to other ones. So critical gender theory is greater than critical race theory. And so what am I saying? Now, I know I am 100% sure, and I absolutely agree, and I state this with fact, Muslim is not a race. Arab is classified as a race. You can say that, but Islam is an ideology or religion, not a race. But I'm going to say, because Britain is made up of a lot of diverse peoples, like Canada is, that odds are, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to say odds are that this Muslim boy, I'm going to say, is a POC, person of color. But you see here that although Islam is also classified as one of the oppressed peoples, and they're in there, they fall below the LGBT issue. And so she equates it with racism, so basically she's calling this Muslim boy racist. That's what she's doing. So it says, as per the recording, the teacher told the students, let me make this very clear. You don't have a choice whether or not you learn about the LGBT plus in this school. You don't have a choice. It's one of our values, and if you refuse to do it, that will be dealt with severely. Unpack that statement. One, you don't have a choice. You're going to learn this. You're going to have it, and it says it's our values. Isn't it amazing that schools are being pushed and being told, hey, you're not allowed to teach any religion. You're not allowed to teach any. You can't teach Islam. You can't teach Christianity. You can't teach Judaism. But we're going to push an ideology on you, whether you agree with it or not. And if you don't agree with it, we're going to penalize you. And she's making it clear that this is the values of it, saying this is what we believe. So in other words, according to the belief of this teacher, which I doubt it's just an individual teacher, I get the feeling that in the higher up meetings, they were told these are our values, and almost every school has it and businesses have it. Anytime you see a job posting or anything that says DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is what they're talking about. They're not really talking about inclusion. They're talking about a value system that says, hey, we are only going to accept this. This is what's happening. This is an ideology that is being pushed onto the kids. And this is being done in the classroom. Now, I'm going to be honest. I don't know how they got a recording of this, but I'm glad they did, because it makes it view. And says, why would I not? She says, why would I care if anyone in this room wants to love somebody, whether it be a man or a woman, the teacher asked. Why would I care if someone wants to say, do you know what? I don't know if I'm more male or female. I'm exploring. Says, what does that matter to me? It doesn't hurt you. Says, but it definitely hurts other people by the words you use. You don't understand that this has an impact. And what she doesn't grasp, what the teacher isn't grasping, is that affirming these things is dangerous. It's dangerous. It is. When someone says, I don't know if I'm more male or more female, that's an issue. That's a psychological issue. It's a psychological issue, whether they want to admit it or not. And to affirm that is actually not loving. It's actually harmful. It really is. They only love to spout stats in one way and neglect all the others. It is not helpful. And the parents say this. The parents contend that the teacher and the school's approach to LGBT ideology has infringed upon their rights, arguing that the school should respect their religious convictions and the right to raise their children according to their beliefs. See, here's the other part of the ideology you've got to understand. They no longer think that the parents own the children, in this case, as possessive, as in the parents saying they're our children. The state or the school is saying, no, they're ours. And it's a battle of ideologies. And here's the major problem, is that parents are sending their kids to these indoctrination centers for 6 to 8 hours a day? And then even when they're home, if you're not paying attention to what they're watching on television, what they're watching online, they're going to be indoctrinated even more. And what you're also running into is, again, notice it says that the LGBT ideology is infringing upon their rights or their ideology. It's a battle of ideologies. That's what it is. And the culture is saying that the ideology that they're putting forth, the cultural Marxism, the critical theory ideology, and that is included all of critical race theory, critical gender theory, the LGBTQ theory, all of that together, that is the ideology of our culture. And yes, it thinks it's greater than all other ideologies. And so they won't deny that it's infringing, but they'll say it's for the greater good of that. And the quote says, "My family and I are Christians. We love our proverbial neighbor as we are called upon by our faith and the scriptures to do so. Nevertheless, also in accordance with our faith and scripture, we do not accept same-sex relationships or relationships as being prescribed by God," a parent wrote in a formal complaint. The parent's name has been redacted in the copy made public by the Christian Legal Center. They're right. This is why I say it's ideologies. It really is. It is ideologies going against one another. And it says, "We accept that we live in modern Britain, but it is highly upsetting to be told that our beliefs do not accord to British values." It says, "It is equally upsetting that my son was shamed in this manner despite not having made any negative connotations about anyone in the LGBT community." See, this is where they don't understand. The values of our cultures have changed drastically. Like I said, when you take a look at this, it says it's highly upsetting told our values do not accord to the British values. They don't anymore. Christian values do not correlate to Canadian values anymore. The States still has enough political aspect that there are Christian values still in the political spectrum, but it's still being taken away. As I said, in Canada, they passed a bill saying you cannot help somebody battle against same-sex urges or transgender urges or talk them out of gender dysphoria. It's all now covered under conversion therapy. You can't do any of that according to the law. If somebody comes and says to you that I'm struggling with homosexual tendencies, the only thing you're legally allowed to do as a pastor or a counselor or anybody in a position of authority is to affirm that. You're not allowed to tell them the opposite. You're not allowed to give them ways to say this isn't right and how to deal with it, because that's conversion therapy. It really is. And so they can say it's upsetting, but that's the reality. It's a battle of ideologies, but what are you going to do? And the other thing you've got to understand, it says it's upsetting that my son was shamed because he did not speak anything against. Notice that as I read the acronym earlier for the LGBTQ and then got into the A's, and one of those was allies. You have to be an ally. It's not enough for you not just to not say something negative. You have to be pushing the agenda, and you have to be shutting down anybody who's against it. This is directly, you can see this as well in Imran Kindi's writings of how to be an anti-racist. And I've seen it in churches and I've seen it in organizations where they say it's not enough for you not to be racist, you have to be anti-racist. And what that means is you have to be willing to tear down anything that they deem as racist or is systemically racist. And here what you're seeing is the same is true for the LGBT. They're saying it's not enough for you not to say something negative. You have to be openly supportive of, and you have to tear down anything that's not. And in this context, the religious faith of the students is contrary to it, so it has to be torn down. That's what has to happen. The complaint letter states that there is no statutory definition of British values that exists, and that the school owes a statutory duty to ensure that the education it delivers respects the manner in which parents wish to raise their children in accordance with their own religious convictions. But I'm going to tell you something, you can't do that. And what do I mean by that? It's not possible to do that. This is where people say all religions are fundamentally the same. No, they're not. All religions are superficially the same, but fundamentally very, very different. And what do you say about that? Well, think about it. Although Christianity and Islam both agree on the issue of morality when it comes to homosexuality, they differ greatly on the sheer tenets of the faith, such as simple as who is Jesus. Islam says he was a prophet, second greatest prophet next to Muhammad. The Christian says no, he was God take on flesh, and he exists now as eternally God and eternally God and eternally man. The hypostatic union. They're drastically different, and so you're not going to be able to do that. You cannot equate all of them together. This is a teacher using his position of authority, emotion, and threatening language to tell children that they do not agree with him or affirm him, then they are less than British, is highly manipulative and inappropriate. Actually, that's exactly what's happening in our culture. If you don't agree with us, then you move to the back of the line. This is what cultural Marxism is. In culture, that's why I said, when you actually start to break this down, protected classes come in a variety of degrees. You got the number 1 protected class, number 2 protected class, number 3 protected class. So currently at the top of the protected class of the critical theory train, the one that's right behind the engine. So critical theory is the engine that's going. If you're going to the train, critical theory is the engine that's driving. The very first car, LGBTQ. It is. You cannot go against the LGBTQ. Behind that would be the racism card, so the POC card. Behind that, maybe Islam, maybe feminism. One of those two, depending on which one, women or Islam. It's hard to determine on that sometimes. I would tend to put Islam ahead of women in that case. And then you've got at the very back of the bus, if they're allowed on the very back of the train, if they're allowed in the train at all, would be what they classify as the oppressors. They get absolutely no rights. They get no privileges. They get nothing. They get everything taken from them to build up the other ones in the name of equity. That's really what it is. So the more oppressed our society feels you are, the closer you are to the top. And so when it comes to this part where they said that you're less than British in that case, or you're less part of society, that's actually what is happening in our culture. That's exactly what's happening. Andrea Williams, chief executive of the Christian Legal Center, criticized the school for promoting a monoculture that requires approval and promotion of LGBT ideology without offering freedom to disagree. What are you talking about? That's been happening all the time. That's what's happening everywhere. That's why when I covered a story about a Catholic student in Canada in a Catholic school who was thrown out because he disagreed with transgenderism, which is the official Catholic Church stance. He was thrown out. This is happening more and more. They say it's rare to gain a window into the world of a UK school classroom. Here we have exposed at first hand the language and actions of a teacher promoting the LGBT ideology. I don't get why do you say that this is a rare look. Go on TikTok sometime and you will find a ton of so-called non-binary, transgender teachers, LGBTQ teachers, putting flags, putting imagery, putting it up and just bombarding their students with this. Why they put in their first orientation when they introduce themselves, they introduce their sexual orientation. They're being bombarded. It's not rare. This is blatant. It says, where is diversity and tolerance here? We have only monoculture and it requires approval and promotion of the progress flag or pride flag or transgender flag. There is no choice or freedom to disagree. Very good, there's not. You either capitulate to it or you're less than in the society. In the name of diversity and tolerance, they become exclusive and intolerant. That's why I shared with you what the LGBTQ QAA junk was all about. Because if you look at it, the one that's missing are typically is the ones who hold that God created the male and female for male and female, and all else is a perversion of that. They're excluded. This is what is happening. This is the ideology that is being pushed onto people. All right, I want to get to the second story here today. Let's get to the second one. I'm going to do that. Let's play my music here. There we go. All right, the second one. Very along the same lines. A little bit here. About the story here. Indiana teacher forced to resign for refusing to use kids' chosen trans pronouns appeals case. Now, the news is they're appealing the case, but I want to break down why they were fired and is it actually right? Is it right? And just by the very picture of this that is chosen, I don't know where they got the picture from, but they got the picture there, which comes right and says, some people are trans, get over it. Some people are trans, get over it. No. I'm sorry, whether you like it or not, transgenderism is a psychological problem. And instead of affirming a psychological problem, they should be seeking proper help. And the first thing they got to know is that God didn't make a mistake in creating them, and God loves them so much that he died for them so that they could have their sins forgiven and be in a right relationship with him. And they wouldn't be under his wrath. See, one of the mistakes is saying that people say, oh, it's like you're trying to say trans people don't exist. No. They exist, but they are a person who struggles with psychological issues. They are. But let's break this down. A high school music teacher forced to resign by an Indiana school district for refusing to use chosen names and pronouns of trans-identified students is asking for an appeals court to rule in his favor. That's right, a student can go to school and say, I'm trans and here's my new names and pronouns. You got to give it to me. And they even come out and say, don't you dare use, and their terminology is, don't you dare use their dead name. That's you denying their existence. But that's not what's happening. So let's look in this. You see, normally what happens, you say, if you don't want to cover somebody's pronouns, and somebody goes, well, my pronouns are they, them, this, that, this, and the other thing, and you're saying, I'm not going to say that, well, you said just use their name. Well, here's a case that they're just coming up with a new name on the spot. Saying, you got to call me this. It's like, I can't do that. So how do you get around it? Well, this is where it gets fascinating. It says, the Alliance Defending Freedom has filed a request for the full U.S. Court of Appeals of the 7th Circuit to hear the case of fired music teacher John Kluge, who is suing the Brownsburg Community School Corporation. A petition for rehearing en blanc was filed last week, with ADF arguing that the ruling against Kluge from a lower court and a 3-judge panel of the 7th Circuit rejects his religious freedom. Again, see what it is. It's a clash of ideologies where transgenderism and the ideology of the world, the ideology of this critical theory, gets greater importance than religious beliefs. So you're not allowed to have religious beliefs. They have to circumvent to this. You give up your religious ideologies because we've got our own ideology, and you've got to hold to that new ideology. Says the panel's majority divergence from so many other precedents also causes it to get several additional questions of exceptional importance wrong, read the petition in part. Says the decision, 1, misconstrues what evidence is relevant in the Title VII discrimination and retaliation cases. 2, it gives public schools free rein to deny any religious accommodation whatsoever. 3, treats as disrespectful and unprofessional a neutral religious accommodation designed to avoid compulsion of objectionable language. And 3, misconstrues causation in the retaliation context. Now, that's some legalese there, but let's break that down. First of all, what they're determining is discrimination. For them to make that ruling, it says, is they've stretched it even more broad than it should be, kind of thing. In other words, the students come in and say, this is my new name. The teacher doesn't want to call them that, so calls them something else. And the teacher, and we're going to break down to it here eventually, but the teacher did not call them an insult, did not call them by the dead name, but called them something else. And I use dead name there as their language. So it goes on. Next, it gives public schools free rein to deny any religious accommodation, because the denial of using their now chosen name was based on religious grounds. And to allow the school to fire this teacher and have the court uphold it, says you just gave public schools the ability to fire anybody who does not hold to their standards. In other words, they could put out a job application and that asks, are you a Christian? Are you a Muslim? Do you have any religious affiliation at all? And they could just throw it out and say, we're not hiring you based on your religious affiliation. That's what he says. You're giving them the power to do that. It's like 3, it treats as disrespectful and unprofessional the neutral religious accommodations. In other words, they're getting rid of any way that you can be neutral. They're going to force you to say what we want you first. They're going to force you to talk the way they want you to talk. That's what it's saying. So this is where a lot of the issues coming up. It's an ideology. It says the petition requested that the appeals not only grant the petition, but also wait to rehear the case until the United States Supreme Court decides Groff versus DeJoy, which is centered on whether the U.S. Postal Service can fire a Christian employee who refused to work on Sundays for religious reasons. That's an important case as well. But there's different things for it. But they want to wait on that based on religious exemption, I think is what they're going for. It says the ADF senior counsel and vice president of the Appellate Advocacy, John Brusk, said in a statement last Friday that government employees should be able to live and work according to their religious beliefs. Well, actually, in our places, you can and you can't. As long as you're one of the protected religions, you can. You can disregard everything else. There was a whole argument about that in Canada not too long ago in 2 aspects. One, would a Sikh, a member of the Sikh faith, or Sikha faith, be able to forego the customary uniform hat of the RCMP of the police force and be able to wear a turban on the job for religious grounds. That was one case. Another one that I could think of was Quebec's, it's not anti-religious law, but anti-religious symbols law, that no religious symbols at all would be allowed to be worn during uniform by government employees. So those are 2 cases that have been here. Are you able to live and work according to your religious beliefs? And this is an interesting debate, because that's the same thing. It's like, can you force a doctor to perform an abortion? Can you force a court judge to affirm homosexual marriages? Things like that. And I'm just talking about government employees here. That's why I'm referring to government. I didn't refer to a pastor there. But can you force them to do this? Or do they have to violate the conscience? Does a doctor have to be forced to participate in euthanasia? Or MAID, as they want to call it, and that kind of thing. It's important questions, because really what it comes down to is 2 ideologies battling against each other. That's what it is. It says, yet the Brownsburg School District ignored the law, deciding Mr. Kluge's religious views couldn't be tolerated, revoked his religious accommodation based on the grumblings of a few, and forced him to resign on the pain of termination. Now, why do they prefer that? Because what they do is, if you're terminated, you would lose benefits, you would lose various things, you would lose a lot of hardship comes with being fired. And so they force you to resign, and that looks better on them, saying, oh, we didn't force them, they resigned, kind of thing. They're going to try to pull a Justin Trudeau, which basically said, I didn't force these people, they chose to do it, kind of thing. The school district decision violates Title VII, which makes it unlawful to discriminate against someone on the basis of religion. It's like we are asking the full 7th Circuit to take this case, reverse this unlawful decision, and rule on the side of religious freedom. Again, what's happening here is a clash of ideologies. That's really what it is. Which ideology is going to stand? What do you do when 2 ideologies are contrary to one another? Because that's what it is. So, what actually is all happening here? So, during the 2017-2018 academic year, Kluge School District told faculty and staff that they needed to use the preferred names and pronouns of trans-identified students. When Kluge objected to the new policy on the basis of religious beliefs, school officials told him that he had to either comply, be fired, or tender his resignation by May 1st, 2018. In 2018, after his resignation was accepted, Kluge sued officials, accusing them of violating Title VII of the federal civil rights law by not accommodating his sincerely held religious beliefs. a lower court dismissed some of the teachers' claim about the school officials and ruled against Kluge, while a 3-judge panel of the Seventh Circuit ruled 2-1 against the music teacher earlier this month. Circuit Judge Ilana Rovner authored the majority opinion, concluded that the undisputed evidence demonstrated that Kluge accommodations harmed the students and disrupted their learning environment. Remember that. It harmed the students. Harmed the students. It says Kluge has produced no evidence tending to show that the transgender students were not emotionally harmed by his practice or that the learning environment was not disputed. So notice, instead of guilty until proven innocent, or innocent until proven guilty, you're guilty until you're proven innocent. He was automatically guilty. They didn't have to prove that they were really hurt by it. They just had to claim that they were, and he had to prove that they weren't. Good luck. Good luck. He says a practice that indisputably caused emotional harm to students and disruptions to the learning environment is an undue hardship to a school, and as a matter of law, as Kluge himself conceded, schools have a legitimate interest in the mental health of their students. Circuit Judge Michael Brennan authored an opinion that concurred in part and dissident in part, arguing that Kluge had a valid complaint regarding the denial of his religious accommodations and that the complaints cited by the majority were just one side of the story. And that is true. But that's the side that they want to believe. That's the side they want to believe. It says 3 of Kluge's students and a fellow teacher, all of whom observed his class in 2017-2018 school year, attested that the last names only practice did not adversely affect the classroom. Boom, there you go. He wouldn't call them by their preferred names, preferred pronouns. So what did he do? He used their given last names. I have yet to meet a transgender person who decides that they're not this sex, they're the other, and they change their name. They never change their last name. Look, can I go back in time and sue my 5th grade teacher because she called me by my last name? So why did she call me by my last name? Oh, just so happened there were 3 Stevens in the class. So one guy got Steven, another one got his nickname, and I got my last name. What harm has that done? And this is why it's not him being to the point that he's saying, oh, I'm going to call you something else. He's calling them by their actual last name. If he read the roll call, even using their so-called preferred names, he was still going to say their last name. But that's not acceptable. Because the ideology says you can't just not be against it. You have to affirm it, is what you have to do. It says Kluge has demonstrated his religious beliefs are sincerely held, and he has established a prima facie case for religious discrimination. Title VII religious accommodation provisions do not apply only in a community accepting of the tenets of an employee's religion. So there you go. That's what his biggest problem was. He did not agree with the policy of you have to use their preferred names and pronouns. So he came up with a compromise where he would just use their last name. How is calling somebody by their last name a harmful thing? And not only a harmful thing, that it makes it an impossible situation, an impossible environment for you to learn. Does that mean if I worked for a company, that anybody who calls me by my last name, I can sue them? Because that's harmful to me? Is that what it is? See, again, what this really is about is not about really did he or did he not. It's about an ideological belief being enforced on another. This is what we're dealing with. It's ideologies that are battling back and forth. He wanted an accommodation, but that's not enough. It's not enough for him not to be against them, not to cause them physical harm. He has to be affirming of it. This is what you're seeing. This is ideology versus ideology. And I'm going to ask you, where do you stand? Is your foundation secure enough that you're not going to be moved from it? Or are you going to fall into what we're going to talk about after the break? Going to fall into syncretism. Because that's a bad place to be. And we're going to see where that is. All right, we'll take our break there. So come on back after the break. Come on back after the break. And we'll we'll look at what is syncretism and why is it a problem, especially in the churches. That's where we're going to go. So come on back after the break as we continue in our episode today, Ideologies and Syncretism.
On behalf of the team at Creation Ministries International, thank you for your first-time visit to creation.com. Creation or evolution? Design or time and chance? It's a foundational question that affects every human being. And that's because what you believe about where we came from affects your ideas about the meaning of life, how you live it, and where you're headed. You see, what you believe about where you came from also shapes your view on whether there's an eternity or not. If we are the result of meaningless chance, then we simply return to nothing when we die. But if there is a Creator God, the Bible tells us that He has done something about the fact we will all eventually die. But can the Bible be trusted in an age of science? We pose three big questions and hope that you can see that the answers to questions 2 and 3 depend upon what you believe about the first one. Creation.com represents over 30 years of research by many scientists and specialists, and here you will find articles and media presentations on this hot button topic, the creation versus evolution debate. Best of all, it's all free. Many have questions like, what about dinosaurs in the Bible? Could God have used evolution? Is there life on other planets? And why would a loving God allow suffering and death? We've endeavored to answer these and hundreds more. So please enjoy creation.com.
All right, welcome back to our episode here of Ideology and Syncretism. And on this second half, we're going to continue that. We've been looking at ideologies. Now we're finally going to get to that other word. You may or may not know it, but I could just be completely, utterly pronouncing it wrong, which is possible. Syncretism. And if you're wondering how that's spelt, S-Y-N-C-R-E-T-I-S-M. Syncretism. S-Y-N-C-R-E-T-I-S-M. Syncretism. What is it and why is it a problem? And how does it go with ideology? That's what we're going to look at. All right. I'm going to be doing that by looking at probably one more article here because it really does bring out what the issue is. It really brings out one of the major problems that is there. Syncretism is a major problem for the church, a major problem for Christianity. So what exactly is syncretism? What does it mean? Well, sync. To put something in sync with one another means you make the two align. That's what it is. You think about two people who are in a boat. If you got two people in a canoe and they're paddling. And if they're not in sync with one another, they're not going the same way, doing the exact same thing, and doing it in sync, the boat's going to have a hard time going forward. You may go left, you may go right, you may go every which direction except straight. And that could be an issue for you. And so syncretism, to sync something, means put two things in alignment so that they work side by side. Now, how does that go with ideologies? Oftentimes it means you're taking two different ideologies and you're mixing them together. You're trying to blend them. And where is this really happening? Christian values are being synced to the world's ideologies. Now, this happens quite a bit. Do you ever wonder where the theory of theistic evolution came from? Why does it actually happen? Because they take a theory like evolution, which some will say, oh, there's absolute scientific fact. Not when you really study the science behind it. The explanation for things can actually be answered in another way as well. They only tell you one side of the argument of the historical science is really what it is. And there's another side to it. And so they say, oh, since there's billions and billions of years, we got to stick that in there somewhere. So theistic evolution. The problem with theistic evolution is the fact that it says that death, which was a result of the fall, existed long before the fall. That was the problem. The sting of sin is death. That's what it is. But they say, no. But how did it come about? They say, oh, we got evidence that goes this way. And so part of what you're seeing in syncretism is when you see pastors who are getting away from the literal interpretation of Scripture because they say, oh, because we found this here, we found that here, this kind of thing. And they're trying to align the two different beliefs. And the same is true also with the ideologies that we talked about before the break. They're allowing it to the ideologies of the world to infiltrate, and instead of being firm on the foundation of the scriptures and Jesus Christ, they're allowing the world's ideologies, they go side by side, and they're trying to blend them together. That is syncretism. And a foundation like that cannot hold. It can't. So let's look at another article here. There's less than half of born-again Christians believe Jesus lived sinless life on earth, the study says. Then the subtitle there, millions of Christians no longer attending church since pandemic. Yeah, I can attest to that. I can attest to that. But less than half of born-again. So that's using the term, that's an evangelical term. That means they've been made new. They claim that Jesus did not live a sinless life. Let's go through some of this article a little bit. Since the COVID-19 pandemic began in 2020, fewer born-again Christians now say that Jesus lived a sinless life during his time on earth. And church attendance has dropped by some 15 million people weekly. A new study from the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University shows. Wow. That's a statement. Now, I can't vouch for the full number there, because a lot of people, they stopped physically attending, but they get teaching online. So the number may not be quite as high as 15 million, but they're not attending service. They're not physically going. There's something about attending in person that's different than attending just online. Trust me, there's a big difference between the two. It says the findings come from the American Worldview Inventory 2023, an annual tracking study of the worldview of U.S. adults involving 2,000 people from across the country and conducted under the supervision of George Barna, director of the research at the Cultural Research Center. While born-again Christians make up about 1/3 of all U.S. adults and are considered the backbone of the local church activity of their higher level of the commitment to the Christian faith, the study shows that between 2020 and 2023, the share of those who say they believe Jesus did not commit sin during his lifetime on earth fell from 58% to 44%. Wow. Why did that happen? Where are they getting this? How about the fact that I've seen the video of a progressive pastor who states that Jesus was guilty of the sin of racism because he doesn't understand what the text says, and is referring to an event with Jesus and the Canaanite woman. So see, Jesus was racist, and Jesus had his racism corrected by this woman. No, he didn't. But that happens when you don't understand the scriptures. Now, God Questions comes out and says Jesus being sinless is essential to the hope of Christians have in him a Savior. If Jesus was not sinless, there would be no sacrifice for sin. If Jesus had sinned during his earthly ministry, then he would have died for his own sin, not for ours. This was the problem. Revelation chapter 5. It goes in, John is in the throne room of God, and it says there's a scroll beside him with the 7 seals. And it says, nobody was found in heaven or on earth or under the earth that was worthy to open the scroll. Why? Because we were all defiled by sin. There was nothing of the saints, nothing of the living, nothing of those who were in Hades that were worthy to take the scroll. And it says, John wept because of this. But the angel said, do not weep, for look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, he is worthy. Why? Because he was sinless. He was perfect. He perfectly kept the law. Without Jesus being sinless, we would have no payment for sin. Yet less than 44% believe this. Less than 44% believe that Jesus was sinless. In fact, I remember in my undergrad, in a religious studies course, one of the females said, I don't believe that Jesus never sinned. And it's like, what is wrong with you? And the Bible says the Apostle Peter stated it clearly. He committed no sin and no deceit was found in his mouth. 1 Peter 2:22. There was no sin. So where are they getting this idea? They're not getting it from the scriptures, obviously, because the scriptures make it point blank. There are some times where you can come across ideas of the scripture and you go, well, that's not very clear. There are a few passages that are crystal clear. And a statement like this from Peter, he committed no sin. That's clear. And yet, I've seen articles where people are trying to say, oh, Jesus broke the commandments in these things. And they try to give examples and it doesn't work. But people who are calling themselves Christian are saying Jesus said this, that Jesus sinned. It says the shift in belief among born-again Christians was among 6 that showed a significant decline in the past 3 years that Barna characterized as indefensible. Now, what would that mean as indefensible? It means tenets of the Christian faith that you cannot hold to. That if you get rid of one of them, any of these, then you really aren't a Christian. Now, it's not talking about doctrines like transubstantiation, consubstantiation, symbolism. It's not talking most likely about salvific baptism or anything like that. It's talking about things such as Jesus was sinless, Jesus died on the cross, Jesus rose from the dead. That's kind of really what it's talking about. These are things that people have gotten away from. It says fewer than half of born-again Christians also now believe that they have a unique God-given calling on their purpose, calling or purpose. Now, that one actually I find fascinating. Now, that's probably going to be derived from Rick Warren's purpose-driven life, and I would challenge that statement of itself. Is that actually a problem? That you have a unique God-given calling or purpose? Look, when they talk about that, they're talking about, oh, you're the next David. You got to figure out your purpose in this kind of thing. And truly, I think that's absolutely wrong. The calling and purpose that we have is to glorify God and to worship Him. And the calling that each of us has is to fulfill the Great Commission, to go forth and go and baptize of all nations in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and telling them all that Jesus has commanded us. That's our purpose. I think sometimes people have fallen into the false ideology that I've got some grand purpose. What happens if I don't succeed in that? What if God's purpose for my life is really where I'm at? To get married, have children, raise my children in the faith, and just to be an influence around me for the gospel. And maybe it's not to be the owner of a Fortune 500 company and donate billions of dollars to some cause and all that. See, so that question I'd be kind of like, So this is one I think is that bad. But notice what it says, the share of those who held that belief fell from 88% to a staggering 46% during the pandemic. I think that's a case of those who stopped attending bad churches stopped hearing that message. Which tend to say if you stop hearing a false teaching, the less likely you're going to hold to it. But other times they're delved into it all. So they use that as an example, but I'd question that. But it says, but a downward trend was also observed among those who say the Bible is unambiguous in its teaching about abortion. That belief fell from 58% to 44%. Those who say that human life is sacred fell from 60 to 48%. And the number of born-again Christians who said God is the basis of all truth fell from 69 to 63 over the period. How could that happen? How could that happen? It happens because of syncretism. What are we hearing constantly? So the Bible doesn't say anything about abortion. You hear false teachers get up there and say, that doesn't say anything about life. That doesn't talk about life. It's talking about something else. Doesn't really mean that. That human life is sacred. No, it's not sacred. The Christian holds a human life is sacred. Why? Because we were created in the image of God. What has happened is if you're going to hold to evolution, you've got to hold that the human life came about simply by cosmic accidents, by mutations, addition suddenly to a genetic code, and you have no purpose, you have no meaning, you have no value. This is the problem. And because you're trying to blend the beliefs together, you're trying to make them sync towards one another, you're getting away from the gospel truth. That is what's happened. That is really what's happening. And since they're hearing all this, saying, no, human life isn't sacred. Not sacred. And there's truth that's out there, that God's not the originator of all truth. Despite the fact that Jesus clearly said that he is the way, the truth. Now, notice that Jesus doesn't just claim that he's proclaiming the truth, or he came to teach the truth. He's saying by his very nature, he is the truth. He is truth. That everything he says is true. Now that doesn't mean that you're not going to find truth in other places, but the originator of the truth is God. Now, what do I mean by there's other truth? You can find truth in other places, but because there is truth in other places, but it's where you get it originated from. It's from God, and the question is that they're saying that God is not the basis of truth, that there's other bases of truth. No, there's not. Anything else that's not from God is a deception, and it is a lie. That's the problem. The share of born-again believers who say they are deeply committed to practicing their religious faith fell from 85 to 50. While the share of those who say they read or study the Bible at least once a week fell from 60 to 55. I'm not surprised by that. Because what do they do? What is this teaching that has been said constantly? That people are saying, there's truth in it, but it's a dangerous thing when it's taken to extremes. So you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. Going to church makes you as much as a Christian as going to a pet store makes you a cat, or standing in the garage makes you a car. Although there's truth in that, it downplays the importance of being in the community. It really does. What do you think that the LGBTQ ideology, they call themselves a community, that you want to be part of this community? See, when Christians stop attending regular services and they stop being part of that community, they're going to struggle. They are. And since from the very beginning only 60% were even reading the Bible, now down to 55%, it's no wonder that those who are deeply committed to practicing the religious faith fell that much. It's no wonder that that's the case. It says, when it comes to the general population of U.S. adults, Berna said that the share of population that claims to hold a biblical worldview fell from 6 to 4% in the last 3 years, while less than half now claim to be deeply committed to practicing their faith through the religious. The measure fell from 60 to 48. So of the 4%, half of that was actually practicing it. Why? Because they're allowing the ideologies of the world to impact their beliefs. Barna also found that only 33% of adults now say that they attend church during a typical week, which shows a decline representing the loss of about 15 million churchgoer adults each week. And I can tell you and testify to that. And it's no wonder. If they're not being grounded in the truth, if we're not being grounded in the foundation, the solid foundation of Jesus Christ, we're going to fall for the lies. That's what's happening. The veteran research said the findings on the drastic shift in Christian belief over such a short period of time are highly unusual. So it's because religious beliefs and behaviors have typically been a hallmark of consistency. Most religious beliefs change over the course of generations, not a few years, Barna says. However, we know that major life crises have the capacity to introduce substantial change quickly in the foundation of people's faith. And the impact of COVID-19 has been significant. Now, I'm going to kind of debate that point a little bit, because I don't think it's the impact of COVID-19 that was the issue. It's that the fact that not only did the government mandate that churches shut down and then sought to fine anyone who gathered while keeping liquor stores and bars and places like that open. At the exact same time, there was suddenly this influx in in the LGBTQ ideology. And that, if I were a conspiracy theorist, there we go, conspiracy theorist, I would say that was a very well thought out plan. That COVID-19, not COVID-19 itself, but taking advantage of it all. If you can get people out of the church and then just blast them with whatever message you want, and in this case, you got to think everything that happened during that time, where you weren't allowed to gather in churches as religious gatherings because that would be too much of a risk of COVID-19. Yet you could gather at a BLM rally, whatever you want. Take the word there. You can call it a Freudian slip if you want. I don't care. BLM rally. You can go. You can gather at a climate protest, and that's not a COVID risk. But if you gathered for a religious belief, that's a risk. And so it's almost like you see this battle that happened. Now, I'm not saying the world did it, but obviously I hold that there is one who's at war against our very souls, who want to keep people away from Christ. And that's what happened. And so you want the other example of something that's not quite the same way? How about the impact of shutting down the schools during that time? How they've been talking about our kids are falling behind. They can't do the reading and writing or anything like that right now. They're so far behind in it because they missed that time. If that is true in the academic world, how true is that also in the spiritual religious context? That they've become truth stagnant. They become spiritually stagnant. And they've gotten away from it. That's the impact of it. It was that they were isolated from it, just like children were taken out of schools. People were taken out of the Christian community and bombarded with the ideology of this world. And what did they try to do? Sync them together. That's what they were trying to do. Says the pandemic was certainly a life crisis for our nation, so that even though this magnitude of spiritual shift was not expected, even though this magnitude of spiritual shift was not expected, it is feasible given the physical and psychological effects of COVID, along with the economic, relational, and lifestyle effects of the government's drastic policies, Barna explained. As he warned in the 2022 Worldview inventory, Barna noted that a significant driver behind the decline in Christians holding to a biblical worldview is syncretism. What is syncretism? An ideology described as the worldview that merges other incompatible philosophies of life into a made-to-order worldview that incorporates enough biblical elements to be minimally Christian in nature. That is what people have fallen into. Syncretism, the worldview that merges otherwise incompatible philosophies of life. That an infant is only deemed a human if the mother wants it inside the womb. That homosexuality is good. That polyamory is good. That all sexual lifestyles are good and actually are better than the biblical mandate. These are incompatible. Yes, I am saying LGBTQ is incompatible with the Christian lifestyle. Abortion is incompatible with the Christian lifestyle. These are incompatible. And what has happened is they're being put together. And even when it comes to this whole idea of SJW, the social justice war, the social justice that is happening, the whole critical race theory that is happening, it is incompatible with the scriptures because it's replacing it. And I have found that every single organization that was Christian that has fallen into the critical theory camp has now actually declined in their need for evangelism. They are more worried about trying to be anti-racist, anti-bigotry, anti-whatever, that they forget that the Christian mandate was to live a life that is pleasing to Christ and to go forth and proclaim Him with boldness and conviction. That's what it is. Too many have moved from the foundation of the gospel of Jesus Christ because they isolated themselves from it, which happened during the pandemic, and then they were bombarded with these other images, constantly bombarded with it, and now they don't know which way to think. And it's causing a meltdown within them. That's what is happening. And this is what was happening with that teacher, because he wouldn't affirm their own personal definition of reality, because he wanted to hold to the actual reality, he was forced to resign. That is what has happened. It says, although some of the beliefs and behavioral shifts seem to conflict with each other, this is precisely what happens when the prevailing worldview of a nation is syncretism, Berna states. Syncretism does not rely upon logic or consistency. It doesn't. This is why you can get statements. I remember even having a discussion with one who came in who was all for homosexuality. And I asked them, can you please tell me what the greatest arguments of why you're for homosexuality? Oh, they were having a little hard time articulating. I said, how about this then? I said, how about this? I said, if two people love each other and it's consensual, I said, and they're not harming anybody else, therefore it should be okay. And they said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. If the people are consensual, it's not hurting anybody else, and they love each other, it should be okay. Then I just simply asked the question. I said, are you therefore okay with a brother and sister being getting married? And it was almost like there was a meltdown. Because I said, what? It's the same argument. They love each other. They're consenting. They're of age. They consent. And as long as they don't reproduce, they're not going to hurt anybody, are they? So why is one argument okay but the other one not? This is what happens. It doesn't have to logically make sense to them. It doesn't, because it's not built on logic anymore or consistency. It's built on trying to just shovel every type of ideology in. And as I said, I would love to say that Christianity has been immune to this, but because the gospel hasn't been preached, because the gospel isn't being proclaimed in its entirety, people are filling in every other gap. I had a discussion here just this past week after teaching. Well, it was from a missionary who had been in the mission field for decades, and he's back home now, and he's doing other things now, more in camping ministry. And we had a conversation. He said, it's so good to hear someone actually teach the word. And he said, because he's traveled around to many churches across Canada, you don't hear it anymore. And even after one of my Easter messages, when I had somebody said that it was so good to hear somebody actually proclaim the word. And that breaks my heart, because that means the pastors aren't proclaiming the word of God. What are they preaching? Well, they're not. They're preaching something else. And so what you have now is people whose logic, they don't go on logic. They don't go on consistency. This is why it doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't matter to it in syncretism. It says, over time, many people struggle with the conflicts inherent in their syncretistic belief system, and they jumble the behaviors that emerge from those beliefs, he added. But for the foreseeable future, it is likely most people will ignore incompatible philosophies and make do the best they can. They are seeking comfort and security more than spiritual and intellectual consistency. That's fascinating. It is. It's going to be two things that are going to happen. They're going to face this. They're going to struggle because it's not a consistent worldview. That's the thing. It's not consistent. This is why from the very beginning I've tried to help you develop an actual foundation, a worldview that is solid. Not just trying to put it all together. Because when you try to put it all together, something is going to give. Something is going to break. Something's not going to be able to stand. It's not. For a little while, you're going to be able to say, yeah. But eventually, it's going to clash. You cannot serve two masters. You can't. Although Jesus uses it as God and mammon, it doesn't matter. You cannot have two conflicting philosophies functioning together. You can't. You're going to obey one or the other, and that is what you are seeing. When people, why are they now saying, well, they don't believe Jesus was sinless. They don't believe that Jesus is the only way. They don't believe that the scriptures are actually contain history. They get away from all this. Why? Because something else is true. They don't believe in the actual sexual ethics of the scriptures. This is why they're fighting against it. They're bombarded. It's like, see how nice we are? Why do you think every time in the media, in shows and movies, they're showing the LGBTQ as being the loving, the acceptance, and then if they have a Christian character, they're the most hateful, despiteful thing, because that's the image they want to put forth. That's what they want to put forth. And this is being bombarded. You're not going to be able to sync these two together. For a while you can. But what happens? Well, you fall away from one. You're going to go one way or the other. You're either going to snap and you're going to return to the faith and see, oh, this actually holds true, or you're going to give it all up and go the other way. But what is happening now, and this is where the irony above ironies is. It says they're seeking comfort and security more than spiritual and intellectual consistency. If they held to spiritual consistency, they would have the comfort and security which they desire. That's the irony of it. In seeking comfort and security more than spiritual consistency, they actually bring more hardship onto themselves. Where if they sought after Christ and the spiritual consistency that comes from Christ, they would have the comfort and security. They would. They would. But too many times they get away from it. So how can we prevent this? How can we prevent ourselves from falling into syncretism? Peter gives the answer. 1 Peter chapter 2. It says, as newborn babes desire the pure spiritual milk of God's word. That's where we need. We need to get away from all these other ideologies, and we need to be in the word. As biblical illiteracy goes on the rise, so does syncretism. The mixing of these worldviews. And it's not going to bring about comfort. It's not going to bring about peace in the long run. And ultimately, in the end, it won't bring about anything. Because if you know the truth that God is loving, yes, God is merciful and graceful, but He is also judge. Not everybody's going to get to heaven. Jesus made it abundantly clear. Narrow is the gate, narrow is the road that leads to salvation, but broad is the road that leads to destruction. And many are on it. Why? Because they've syncretized these things. They can't do this. We must stand firm on the gospel. And the best way to do that, to help us stand firm, one, yes, read the scriptures. Get into them. As 55% have gotten away from it, that's an issue. The second, do not be amongst those 15 million who stopped attending the local church. Get yourselves into a biblically sound church. I'm not advocating if you're in the area that you have to attend the one that I lead. I'm just telling you to get into a biblical church. One that teaches the truth of Jesus Christ unapologetically and teaches it boldly without compromise. That's what we need. That's where we got to be. Stand firm on the foundation. Do not give in to the ideologies of this world. Stand on the foundation of Jesus Christ. And it is there that you will ultimately find what you're looking for. Comfort and security. Because that's only found in Jesus. That's where we got to be. All right. We'll come to a close there for this episode. Again, I always thank you for joining me. And I always say, if you want to support what I do here, I never ask for money. I don't. I do this out of the goodness of my heart. I do this because, one, I desire to help you. I desire to have you grow in Christ. But if you want to help out, the only thing I ask is you spread the word. Share it. Send it to somebody else. And if you're struggling with something, I always encourage you to write to me as well. Maybe I'll cover it here. Maybe I'll cover it on a different teaching. I'd love to be able to help you on that. Write in questions. Write in discussion. I'd love to help you walk through it. But until next time, stand firm on the foundation of Jesus Christ. Don't be moved from it, and don't mix in the ideologies of this world. Because it's in Jesus that you stand firm, and it's in Him you have the answers. And in Him, there is life.